So we've taken a look at the Retell AI dashboard. Let's now look within the create an agent dashboard. So the first thing we need to do is we click create an agent. And for the purpose of what we're doing, we're going to create a single prompt agent. And then we are going to hit on start blank. So when we do that, we get through to our single prompt agent dashboard. Now we're going to walk you through this so that it doesn't look too complicated. Let's first look at this big box in the left center, and this is where your prompt will go. And we will be looking at this in more detail later, but this is the brain of your agent. This is where we will be talking about its behavior, what it does, and everything like that, and everything in between. The next thing to look at, take a look at the screens up here. What we have is our LLM, and this is the language model that we choose, like ChatGPT or Claude. And if you can see here, this is where they give the prices. This is constantly evolving and constantly changing, but the go-to one to use at the moment is 4.0 Mini, but we can look at that in more detail later. The next thing to look at is your voice. And here we've got the different voice libraries that we can choose from. So we could choose from 11 Labs or PlayHT or OpenAI. 11 Labs seems to be the go-to, but we can have a play around of that later. And then we have our settings of the voice model. You can set them to English only, or you can also set them to be multilingual, which is great. And then there's some other settings to look at, like a voice speed, voice temperature, etc. And then you can select the language that you want them to primarily talk in. English is the standard for what we're doing. But obviously, if you're from a different country, you can use Spanish, or if you're going to use multilingual, you can click on multilingual and the LLM or the agent will know to switch voices. Then if we look up here, so your agent ID is your ID that's going to be used when you start connecting your agent to, say, Go High Level or Mate. And here is what's good to keep an eye on. So this is your cost per minute. And this will chop and change based on the additions that you add on to it. So the voice agent will add on a little bit to it, and so will the large language model. And as we go through building this voice agent, there might be other little pieces that start adding to your cost per minute. And then we've got the latency. The latency is also something to keep an eye on. So if we can see here, what's affecting the latency is the voice and the large language model and the transcription. If we were to change the large language model, for example, if we were to change it to 4.0 Mini, so we'll see the latency change down dramatically, which is great. However, it's now super expensive. So the latency changes based on certain things that you use when you're creating the agent. If we scroll down to the welcome message, there's 3 types of welcome messages. There is where the user initiates, and that is where your voice agent will stay silent until it hears a hello or how are you. It will stay silent until it hears the other person on the phone, and it will respond to that. That is normally based on outbound calls. And then you have your AI initiates, which is a dynamic message. That means once the voice agent understands its goal, it will use that accordingly to base an opening message. Otherwise, if you want it to stay static, you can define its message and then you can write the message right here, and then it will always start with that message. That's the welcome message. Next, you've got the functions. Here is where you add certain functions. The functions that come already pre-built within Retell AI are the end call, which is ending a call, call transfer, transferring call, checking your calendar availability for cal.com, and booking it, and then IVR. We're not going to look at these 3. We are only going to look at end call and call transfer. And then if you wanted to add other functions, you can add custom functions. And then we've got the knowledge base, and that was where we looked at the knowledge base within the dashboard earlier. Now you can just add your knowledge bases. You can select them in here for your specific voice agent. And then you've got your speech settings. So we've got your background, responsiveness, your interruption sensitivity, back channeling, which is where the agent will make it sound more human. And then we have call settings. Call settings, this is a handy one if you're doing outbound calls. So let's say we have a voice agent that calls to remind someone of their appointment. If the person doesn't pick up, then this will detect it and leave it a voicemail, and then use a key input, and then use a keypad input detection. So it listens out for the keytones. We can leave all of that, but it's good to definitely have a play around. And then we've got the post-call analysis. We will be filling this in later. What this is where you will define what data that we want the voice agent to take. So during the conversation, hi, what's your name, email address or phone number, whatever it is that we're designing the agent to do. From that conversation, this is where we prompt what specific information we want to grab. Then we've got the security fallback settings. This is for the more sensitive client, like your health care or finance. You don't really need to do anything with this unless you're handling really sensitive data. And then your webhook settings. This is what communicates make.com or any other automation software to Retell. We will also be looking at this a little later. And then on the right hand side here, we have the big button for test. This is where we will test our agent, or we can even test the variables. And then we've got up here, which is the create in a simulation. A simulation is a way to test your voice agent thoroughly in a very large succession. We can create test cases and then let them run on their own and then see whether the test passes. We can go into that in more detail later. And that is it for the dashboard. Join me in the next one where we'll be talking about creating the voice agent prompt.